Well, Sarah and Denise, I am so happy to have you here on the Social Entrepreneurship and Innovation Podcast. And for folks who are unfamiliar, would one of y'all mind diving in and explain a little bit as to who you are and what it is that you do?
Sure, I'll maybe launch into that. We've been around for about 15 years. Our company is called Fairware, and we're a custom branded promotional products distributor. So we brand merch for great companies out there. We started with a mission to change the world, and that mission has held true all through these years, through the ups and downs, including the one we're in now. We're a founding Canadian benefit corp, and we make merch for NGOs and brands ranging from UNICEF USA to Ben & Jerry's to Patagonia to some great Canadian brands like Van City and Hootsuite.
Excellent. And Sarah, if you mind stepping in a little bit as well.
Sure. Yeah, we sometimes cooking for evidence. Yeah, we have a great team. We have stuck to our mission through thick and thin, including this time. We're committed externally and internally to social justice and change. So we work with our team on that front as well, and are active in our communities and yeah, it's a mission that's both external and internal.
And Denise, you did make mention of the 15 years and some of the exceptional clients that y'all have worked with. Everyone from Ben & Jerry's, Hootsuite, Patagonia, 7th generation, quite the extensive list. But I'm curious to know, and I know the worldly context right now is certainly not an easy one, but I'm curious to know kind of what it's like to be 15 years into it from what I understand is a business that got kicked off in Sarah's garage.
It's interesting to see how things have evolved over the years. I think for us, what I would say has been most interesting over the last maybe 5 to 6 years is a shift in the maturity of our supply chain around these issues. When we were in the garage, A, a very particular kind of client would call us, and I'll speak to that in a second, and B, we would have supplier calls and get hung up on, or have these really awkward conversations when we'd start asking questions about worker rights or the materials or the finishes or the inks or whatever it was. And I'd say that, something that's been really inspiring to be part of the journey in the industry is that a lot more suppliers are paying attention to these issues, and that's been A, made it easier for us, and B, it's just nice to see that we've been a part of moving the dial in the industry, and folks are paying more attention. I think in the early days we tended to get the NGOs, the B Corps, the really deep mission aligned brands calling us. I think what's been interesting in the last handful of years is we're getting a lot more what we would call, I guess, mainstream, kind of brands calling us, just starting to think about their journey, wanting to have conversations around how to show up better and make better purchasing decisions. So it's been kind of interesting to see the transition both on the client and the supplier side.
And it seems to be a bit of a trajectory in regards to businesses like y'all's, that there's this really, kind of core group of early adopters, who are already, you don't even really have to communicate the why, behind what they're doing, what you're doing. They already get it and they want to work with you on that. I'm interested, what do you feel like has allowed y'all to have such success and sustainability, and ultimately as well the ability to start to appeal to or be the choice that some of these mainstream companies are reaching out to as it relates to these promotional products and everything that y'all provide?
Well, I think it's knowing our stuff. I mean, we've always had that knowledge base with regards to sustainability and ethical sourcing. So, we're educational we sell things, but we're also, in a relationship and a journey with clients too. For those who are far along, they don't necessarily need that, but they're so relieved to find us because we can meet them where they are. And for those who aren't that far along, we're there to help and assist and educate and provide, information to get them there. So, yeah, I think it's very much about being the kind of, even though we sell product, there's so much more to what we offer and do, which makes us stand out, but also be a fit for folks who are wanting to get on board and get on this path to sustainability.
And I think to build on that, what Sarah points out, there's like more than the product, even beyond the sustainability advising that we do and the support we provide for our clients on, how to activate their campaigns in better ways. There's a lot of just good old-fashioned customer service that we provide. We're constantly trying to innovate on things that seem mundane, like back-end order management, ordering the promotional merch better, like helping people figure out size curves for their staff, or drop shipping, in this case to people's homes. And it's that administrative support or that customer service that I think, bodes well for us. It's what also helps get us referrals. And I think it's important, especially for emerging businesses that are coming into this space with a strong social or environmental mission. Sometimes you can focus so much on that you forget just to run a really tight ship and have a great business model or a great team and like excel at customer service. And those are the things that keep people coming back. You can sell a great ethically made sustainable t-shirt, but if they don't have a great experience in how that gets delivered from beginning to end of the sales cycle, they don't necessarily come back even if the t-shirt was great. So I think sometimes when I'm talking to young entrepreneurs, I always remind them, like, don't forget the basics, because that's really what will keep you going over the long haul as a company.
That's interesting. And what was there? So you said y'all got into the business with the mission to change the world. Was this baseline understanding of, having a commitment to, like you said, running a tight ship? Was this something that was always present there of mind? Or was there a particular inflection point or maybe some reflection from a customer experience to where you're like, okay, these are things that we have to focus more so or more attention on than solely just our social and environmental aims and objectives?
Yeah,
sorry to dig deep into the
I mean,
archives.
it's like in terms of starting the company, like we started with a mission. I came out of outdoor retail. I was the director of sustainability for Canada's largest outdoor retailer. So I was steeped in this. It was what I was doing professionally for a large brand. And through that experience, identified a market gap. So we came into this knowing that in the world of swag, the stuff we all get, as it's sometimes referred to, that there was just an immense amount of terrible product and nobody knew where it was coming from. It was made from really, suspect materials. A lot of products weren't meeting baseline product safety standards in either Canada or the US. Like, it just was an industry that hadn't really evolved much in this area. So we knew that there was an opportunity for a very fresh approach to promotional products in the space. I mean, that's kind of how we launched. Sarah, would you say that there were moments along the way that cemented that, or maybe made us, pivot towards more social, or maybe pivot internally? I don't know, you might have some moments in time, but it's always been there from the get-go in terms of a really deep mandate around these issues.
Yeah, I think in terms of the business piece, in terms of running a business, I think we realized, none of us knew anything about this industry at all, or had run a business in this way. So very early on, I think we recognized our shortcomings, and we got a business coach advisor like very early on, probably in the first year or so. Who was a numbers guy, and that was that had a big influence on how we then move forward in terms of our rigor around systems and just reading a million books and making sure that we were attending to the systems and the business side of things and not just, the social and environmental pieces.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That point you mentioned there explicitly of seeking out a business coach, what kind of decision process was that? Like, was that something that was very clear and present of mind? Because that's very interesting, because I think a lot of young or early stage entrepreneurs can kind of flounder, for some time without maybe reaching out to receive the wealth of support and advice that is available in the world. So I'm interested to hear a bit more about that, and like why did y'all come to that conclusion that was something that you wanted to seek out?
I don't remember what your recollection is, Dees, but I know at the start there were 3 partners, and I was the only one who was kind of working in the business. And I think part of it was a way to have someone that was kind of was an outside kind of objective opinion for all of us to be able to rally around, and to, instead of, because our experiences in the very beginning were so different from being outside, Denise and Andrea still in their day jobs and me there. So for me, it was, I think it was really helpful in that way to recognize that we needed someone objective and with more expertise than we had. And I don't think it was that difficult of a decision, even though it was, spending money in the early days and we didn't really have any, but it was probably one of the wiser decisions that we made early on, I think.
Mm-hmm. The other thing we did early on, which helped, is we got invited to this thing. I mean, I've always called it the Breakfast Club. I don't think it ever, I'm just going to call it the Breakfast Club, but it was about 8 to 10 entrepreneurs in Vancouver, all social impact focused entrepreneurs at various tenures in their business. And we had breakfast together, I'd say 8, 9, 10 times a year for probably 10 years or 8 years, like a long time. And that became a very, very trusted group. We all went through a lot of different things, including people losing their businesses, like expanding, selling, all the things that you can go through as a business owner, and having a really trusted group that knows your business, kind of the mastermind model, except we made it up. Nobody paid anything. You just kind of paid for your own coffee and muffin in the morning. And it was a very confidential and transparent group. And that became an incredible resource too. And that's something I always say to folks, like, find your people, create some sort of process around connecting quarterly or monthly or whatever you want to do. Be honest, tell them the ups and the downs, because more often than not, someone's been through it before. And that, I remember conversations at that table ranging from how to fire a client who was just a misery to work with, to, negotiating better rates with your UPS account. Like, it was really brass tacks, financing, all sorts of things. And I thought that was a really useful vehicle for us, because, as Sarah said, neither of us had business backgrounds at all. Like, we were completely new to business. The funny story is we had to Google what PO meant before we cut our first PO. So it was the depth of our knowledge.
I think that was a little story I heard of another podcast you were on, Sarah, about the first purchase order that you had to put together. But that's wonderful advice and a really valuable reflection. And I'm interested with this group of impact-oriented entrepreneurs. Was it that group that did y'all kind of collectively all become B corporations, or those who had an interest in it, or was someone in that group referred the certified B corporation community to you, or how did that come about in 2010?
I think we were one of the first, and then a few others right away as well, and then others
Yeah, I
you know,
think
I
us and
just
Lunapads were I think Lunapads
first,
and us were the first to go through. And then it would be, folks who are really reflecting on like what was the value add to their business. The B Corp, the B Lab was wooing me in my previous role. So I was quite familiar with the B Corp process from when I worked at the outdoor retailer. And it took us a little bit to decide to pursue it. And I'm so grateful we did. Like, it's been such an incredible benefit on so many levels, both from a business growth perspective, but just from a network of peers to, again, get help from. I mean, that's the thing that I love about the impact business community is I found people very generous with their time and knowledge and inspiration. So.
And I guess speaking of that, because we're working through our certification ourselves here, any kind of tips or strategies for obtaining the score necessary to submit?
well, it's pretty different depending on what kind of business you have. So if there's a lack of manufacturing and supply chains like that, I think it's probably not as complex. So
my big tip is I think the thing that I would recommend is just write everything down. Like, for every box you check, make a note of how you got the number, like what was your process. So if you're trying to figure out your energy data, it's like literally what line do you look at on your utilities bill or on your property management invoice, and take a photo of it and highlight it so that because then you can delegate it next time, you can remember how you do it next time. I feel like some of our early mistakes, especially because I had a certain category to cover, which was supply chain, and then some of the climate related GHG, there's a lot of post-it notes all over the place, which they don't make sense 2 years later when you go to research. So I think management systems, like, we've got a pretty good system now, everything from just a basic filing system, but we've got a pretty good system to make sure that we can get back to the data, do it quickly, don't have to reinvent wheels again. And that's been helpful as you kind of go through the process. So that first time over, be mindful of how you're getting it and document that, not just the number that you get.
Yeah, we use a project management tool now, Asana, so we can record it all there and then just bring it up again and get back to it, which we have to do very soon.
And I mean, speaking of this, it's a decade of being a certified B Corporation. And Denise, you mentioned how it's been incredibly changing, from the sense of just the network community of peers, as well as what that's done for y'all's business. Can you say more about what it's like to be a B Corporation now for a decade? Few can say that.
Yeah, I know. It's like the elders. Well, I think for us, there's been an enormous amount of benefit. Like, it still remains our number one referral channel. It's people seek us out because we're B Corp, whether it's B Corps choosing to do business with B Corps, which is one channel, or municipalities, universities, nonprofits seeking us out because we're B Corp, and it's become, in some sectors and some institutions, kind of a proxy for good supply chain. So they might not have their own in-house ethical sourcing team or sustainable procurement framework, and so they just pick B Corps for office supplies or catering or promotional products. So it's kind of a fast track to that kind of buyer. So that's been useful. But I think for me, personally, one thing, the network of peers has been incredible, just learning from one another, sharing resources. And I think for me, plugging in particular in the last few years to the activist side and working with fellow B Corp CEOs and leaders on climate activism and trying to mobilize the business voice around progressive climate policy in the US and Canada, and having a network and a framework and a way to kind of amplify what we're feeling and worried about here, and being able to use some of that energy to motivate other business leaders and participate with other business leaders in those important conversations has been great. And I think for me, and Sarah might be able to, does a lot more work in this space in the B Corp community, but I think for me, a gift in the last few years has been the deep dive that the B Corp movement is doing on racial inequity and social justice. And I'm just learning a lot in a way that I haven't had exposure to, and you know, just haven't been able to see through some of the lenses I'm seeing through now. That B Corp's kind of amplifying just how important and critical these issues of racial justice are. So that's been personally really useful for me in the last few years.
And Sarah, anything to add to that?
You know, I think it's been an important community to be a part of in a number of ways. And as you know, Denise mentioned, I've been involved with the piece called We the Change, which is, you know, amplifying women's voices in business and LGBTQ and et cetera. So for me, it's, I believe that, you know, my learning, especially around equity, diversity, inclusion was started with, you know, I don't know, a number of years ago as a part of the assessment. And, you know, there's a lot of these questions that were asked, some of which, you know, are kind of easy for us to respond to, and others that were challenging and really set a course for us to make changes, to educate, to learn, to implement changes in our own business. And it's, you know, I'm grateful for that. I feel like that I've learned, I'm obviously still learning, but I've learned a lot, and I really appreciate, especially right now, how much the community has stepped up and is really, you know, tackling this head on.
Yeah, I think just as we're working through our assessment, it's like it's a course in itself. You know, and there are a few questions where we're like, I don't even know where to begin. But luckily now, maybe versus in 2010, there's some more resources surrounding each individual question. They've done a really good job of doing that, as well as other folks throughout the community. And so I guess looking forward a bit more, I'm kind of, you know, made y'all track back. Despite, you know, the circumstances, the context that we're in right now in the global pandemic and facing very acute issues socially head on right now, what still has y'all very, I guess, excited or optimistic about the community you're a part of, and maybe hyper specifically the work that y'all are doing at Fairware here throughout this year and next 5 years, next 15 years maybe?
Well, I certainly am hopeful that what's happening around racial justice right now is going to last, and it's going to be a seismic shift, and will be more ingrained in the way that kind of CSR and sustainability has, you know, become more mainstream, and people really have been embracing that in a more real way. You know, I'm hopeful that the same will happen for this, and I look forward to being a part of helping to drive that change through our business and through my own, you know, work in the community. But it's, you know, it's a different world. It's gonna be a different world for us. Our industry is changing, as you can imagine. We do a lot of conferences and events, and that's kind of exciting too. Like, it's, you know, I think that there's been change that's been coming and would have come maybe in 5 or 10 years, and it's just now it's happening. So we've already been thinking ahead anyway for the last couple of years, so it's just kind of sped up that process. I'm sure you have things to add to that, Denise.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, in terms of what does the future hold, that has me excited. November in America and the elections. I look forward to that as a Canadian, and on behalf of the rest of the world, we're all really looking forward to that. I think the product innovation piece, and Sarah alluded to that in terms of we've been thinking for a couple of years about what does the future look like, and COVID-19 has accelerated that for us in terms of essentially decimating the events and conference industry this year. I think it'll look different when it does come back. And I feel like we're already ready for some of that in terms of looking at digital rewards and different ways to distribute and connect with clients that aren't always a physical product or more of a unique distribution model for a physical product. So we've been working on some things that I think will bode well for us. But I think I'm really quite hopeful about just the emergence of more sustainable textiles, materials, products, generally in the marketplace, specifically in our industry. I'm hopeful again about who's calling us. We're getting these bigger brands where it's a little bit like, how did you get our phone number? Like it's startling that they're finding us, and exciting that they want to have these conversations. I mean, they're finding us because we're pushing the envelope in this category, and we're helping brands amplify themselves to their clients, to their staff, to whomever they need to get out in front of in a more sustainable way. And they want to know how to do that. And I find that inspiring. It's one thing when another B Corp calls you, of course they care. Of course they're thinking about this. They've had to go through the B Corp assessment. They're thinking deeply about all points along their sales journey, all points along their supply chain. But when some of the folks that you wouldn't necessarily think are worried or contemplative about these issues are calling you and asking you about, are you minority owned, or what are the materials that you can bring to bear for us in our t-shirt line? It's exciting to see that the world's changing and buyers are changing across the gamut. So I'm finding that quite hopeful. It's interesting, just to see who's calling.
Yeah, and the TikTok buyers are going to come in.
Yeah, exactly.
The TikTok buyers.
TikTok buyers. The transparency thing is interesting too. Like people want the story. They've always wanted the story from us of where do things come from, but it's that whole piece around just opening up supply chains and being more transparent is really, really coming to a head. And it's going to be interesting to see the next few years in our industry to see who steps into that and who runs away from it.
Yeah, I'm interested to hear a bit more as to how those conversations, I guess, are different with those phone calls from folks who you wouldn't really be expecting or a bit surprised by to be calling you in the first place. What are those discussions looking like now? I mean, in contrast to maybe some of your more typical clientele before.
Yeah, well, one of the there's a couple of things to say there. One thing I've always found interesting is depending on what's important to a person, it leads the conversation. So we'll sometimes have people we'll have unions call us, and labor rights will be very, very important to them, or domestic manufacturing or union made. But sustainability isn't. It could be made from conventional cotton or PVC. Sometimes we'll have people call us, and the material side of the conversation, the sustainable attributes of the product is really important, but they've never really thought twice about worker rights. So it's always kind of fascinating, like where the interest comes from. But I would say that when we have more, mainstream buyers call, the conversation, for example, might start with compliance-based questions. So, do these meet product safety standards, or is the facility certified against a certain compliance standard? Whereas a lot of our, B Corp clients, they just assume that all that's taken care of, like that, it's not even in their vernacular, because of course it does. Now let's talk about innovations in textiles. So it tends to be it can be a bit more compliance-based still with the more mainstream buyers. And sometimes it's about helping a mainstream buyer connect the dots. And I'll give you a quick example. Maybe it's a large recycling or waste management firm versus an organic food company, or a food company. And it's like, okay, well, if you're in the waste industry, let's try and get you recycled content products. Like, let's help you close the loop. Let's help you tell your own story through the products you buy. So we'll put you on a recycled polyester tote bag instead of an organic cotton tote bag, because our pet tote bag is part of your whole narrative as a brand. And sometimes, we'll have buyers that are just starting to get getting these conversations, and they're not thinking like that. They're not really thinking strategically about how their product might be able to tell their entire brand story. Whereas a lot of our kind of B Corp or activist NGOs, like, they get it, and an organic food company, it's pretty obvious that you'd go into natural fibers, for example, and certified organic textiles with them. So again, it's trying to kind of connect the dots and helping people along that journey. And I'd say some of our more sophisticated buyers, the dots have been connected. They've been reporting for years. It's part of their strategic framing. It's part of their brand offering. And with other folks, it's a little bit like their core business is here, and maybe their CSR report that someone wrote 2 years ago is over here, and no one's really doing this. And we joke sometimes that we're cultural interpreters between the marketing and the business strategy folks and the sustainability people, and we can sometimes help bridge those gaps and help this story become more infused in this day-to-day activity.
And so maybe some hypotheses around where this evolving interests and as well just need for sustainable products. Where do you think this is going to take y'all's industry? I mean, you've made a few comments on it already, but as y'all are making adaptations and where you think things are specifically headed with this, new interest, new demand, what are some thoughts about where it's headed?
I mean, I think there's going to be folks who are slow to adopt, and it's that kind of industry anyway. It has been. I mean, I think a lot of businesses are gonna, like, the industry is gonna shrink by about half. That's the projection for this year, and I think the convergence of climate change, the urgency around that, and the urgency around racial justice and social justice, I think is going to push a lot more people to get on board. That's what I think. I think that more folks are going to get on board quicker than they might have had not all of these things happen, and even climate change. I mean, that's my hope, I guess.
Yeah, I think we're seeing, and we have been seeing with our client base, is sometimes a diminishing budget for things right now. In particular, I'm speaking to COVID. But when they are doing merchandise, it's really got to hit the values piece, right? So that kind of, we don't need 1,000 knickknacks for a trade show, but we really want to let our staff know we're thinking about them, right? And sort of mindful, higher value and nicer, better products. So we're seeing, I think, quality move with our client base. But yeah, I think one of the things that I've been noticing in the last year and hearing about is that there is this, I think there's going to be a huge focus on support for minority-owned businesses in the coming years. I think there's, that's going to be meeting this rising tide of desire for sustainable products. I think the folks that can transect those two movements and understand the importance and the nuances of those two movements between sustainability and diversity, equity, and inclusion are going to go further, faster. And I think that'll be kind of interesting to watch, like what do these new emerging markets look like and supply chains look like, and where do those two movements meet up? I think a lot about supply chains, so I'm always thinking about like how do these movements meet up potentially with the rise of a new kind of entrepreneur. So I think there's a lot to come that'll be exciting.
The rise of the new kind of entrepreneur, are these the TikTok entrepreneurs? Is that what you're referring to? Or?
Yeah, I mean, it gets the TikTok entrepreneurs, I think. Like I was looking at data on the number of minority-owned businesses in our industry that identify as like ethnic minority-owned businesses compared to women-owned minority or veteran-owned, and some of the other certifications, and it's like alarmingly low. I don't even know like if the numbers are public that I saw, but it was like heart-wrenchingly low. And I think it's, if we want to start to talk about how to address injustices, it's around moving ownership and wealth along, and I think it's going to be supporting a new kind of business owner and enabling people to get into spaces that have historically been the bastion of white privileged folks. Like look at the typical entrepreneur in an organic food company or a sustainable products company. It's much like the climate movement. It tends to be white. And like those are some of the things that I think that's more what I'm getting at. It's like, what would the new entrepreneur look like if we can infuse some communities to embrace sustainability and just be on this leading edge of the next wave of product innovation, and how do we all move forward at the same time? What might it look like? So I've just been thinking about that a lot. I think there's two, Sarah named it, there's kind of this urgency around climate, and there's an urgency around racial equity and D&I, and like how do we move forward collectively in both those conversations at the same time together? Because those communities haven't been historically having a lot of conversations together.
Definitely. Well, Denise, Sarah, I really appreciate y'all's time. Can I ask you a few rapid fire questions before we finish up?
Sure.
Cool. First things first, whoever wants to dive in, what's maybe a favorite book that you always come back to recommend, or a book that's really impacted you recently? Whoever wants to touch first.
Oh my God, I have to keep a list of books that I read. And I go, I don't know how I read the best book. What's the title? I'm like, I don't know. You know what I mean? What did I just read?
I have one that I was actually just kind of flipping through again the other day. It's like one of the Heath brothers ones called Decisive, like how you make decisions. And it just talks about how easy it is to influence the outcome of a decision. And how you just get bad decisions because you're constantly trying to like frame up all of the questions to get to the outcome that you want. And I think that's just, for me in particular, I find it quite insightful of like how to actually let go of the answer you want and listen to what other people might have to say to the question. I think that's a good one for entrepreneurs. I think they know which the direction is the right direction. That's been kind of a good one for me.
Great.
I just started How to Be an Anti-Racist. Yeah, which is really good.
Perfect. We'll have those linked up. And are there any particular organizations or companies as of late that have really inspired y'all that you think are worthy of getting a quick plug?
I'm pretty impressed with Ben and Jerry's. And I think they're really getting a lot of attention right now for their stance on racial justice. And I think the story behind, what they've been doing, that they started this work 4 or 5 years ago. It has not been easy work for them. And they've been doing some heavy lifting for a long time to try and wrap their heads around how to show up and look at themselves and leverage their their platform for change. And I think it's kind of paying off for them in terms of being able to keep a sustained voice in the debate right now, and to hopefully move some people towards very specific legislative actions. And I'm super inspired by them, and I feel really proud that they're a client and friends, and they're doing a great job out there.
Yeah, I agree. It's like Ben and Jerry's, Patagonia, like brands like that who essentially put what's right and what's just before business. Like it's so inspiring to see. And especially as all of this, all the brands were standing up and doing their little black squares and like, oh, we're committed to this. And, folks like Ben and Jerry's who've been at it for so long, it's not a new thing. It's not just because so it's such important work, and it is so inspiring.
Certainly would agree. And lastly, any parting pieces of advice? I know you've shared a few throughout our chat already, but piece of advice for the aspiring or active impact-driven entrepreneur?
Yeah, I think that what, Denise mentioned in the very beginning, which is, like we really see it a lot of folks who have a great idea and but don't necessarily have a partner, a business partner, or a complementary person who can kind of get things going or do that sort of systems running the business side. And it's critical because we're not going to drive change unless the businesses succeed. So a great idea is only as good as the business is itself in terms of being able to be successful and profitable.
Yeah, I think that's a good one. I have a little Post-it note on my home office right now because we've been working at home for the last 3 months until last week. It just says, don't waste a good crisis, right? And I think we're obviously in an epic global crisis right now, but I think as entrepreneurs, reasonable crises show up every month, every quarter, every year, and not being paralyzed by them, looking at them, understanding how they might serve up an opportunity to shift or move or change a process or change the way you look at things. And I think that's something we're really trying to embrace right now at Fairware when we're facing an industry that's, anticipated to be down 50%. And we're seeing like substantive and significant hit on our own business. And so just, how are we resilient through this, and how do we shift and come out better and stronger and more impactful? So that's kind of my mantra of late that I've been saying over and over to myself as I ride my bike to and from work. Don't waste a good crisis.
Perfect. And finally, anything particular that y'all would like to plug related to Fairware outside of the website? Anything of immediate attention that we should direct folks to?
Yeah, I think for folks, if you want to see the kind of work we do, go to our lookbooks and you'll see all the fabulous work we do. If you want to see how we do it, the resources section in our how-to guides, we actually have a lot of great content there on sustainable textiles, how to start an ethical sourcing program. There's a lot of resources there that could serve as little roadmaps as you're starting to build out some of your own programs and policies. So what we do, go to lookbooks. How we do it, go to our resources section.
Great.
Yeah, like right now we're just, we're focused on back to work and working from home and really looking at all the aspects of that, from a mental health perspective to safety, to comfort. And so we've really approached this time from not just a product point of view, but from an educational point of view. Like what do people need to feel safe and comfortable, et cetera. So again, more lookbooks on that. You can see what we're on about.
Perfect. We'll have everything linked up in the show notes at growensemble.com. Sarah and Denise, thank you so much for taking the time.